Hello, it's Laurie, your blockchain Brad, and today I'm speaking with none other than Steve Kokinos. He is the CEO of Algorand, and it's been a long time coming, this interview. It's been very much a hot topic for a long time. Right now, they're in the mix. They're about to really make big news with an auction. Steve, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Brad. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Now, as I said before, you're very busy. You've got a lot of things lined up today, a lot of things happening for your Dutch auction. But Steve, I want to first talk about the statements that Algorand makes with regard to what they stand for. Some of them are things like the borderless economy or boundless opportunities. Can we start there and bring it back to basics? What fundamentally is Algorand actually trying to do?
Well, I think in a very simple terms, we think the opportunity is to build a decentralized economy. And we think in order to do that, you need to think of a number of different things, but we need to attract people into our economy. We need to provide really great technology. We need thoughtful economic management. And also we need to really improve on the experiences of users and developers. And I think more than that, we really look at about 20 million developers in the world. Only 100,000 or so are currently working on blockchain or crypto projects, and that's what we really need to do to move the needle, is to bring more and more of them in. And today we see the tools as just being dramatically too complicated for that. So for us, taking a step back, it's looking at sort of a broad goal of how do we really reshape the financial system. How do we bring a lot of people in to be involved? And then separately, how do we use that to empower people around the world? And so, definitely, I think we're trying to start with a story of both kind of technology and credibility. But I think more than that, if you look at a lot of other projects, I think the idea of decentralization is more of an idea than a reality. And we definitely believe that public permissionless networks that anyone that can join, that can't be censored, are critically important for the world.
Can we explore that a bit more? Because you've referenced this many times in different interviews and discussions as a core asset of Algorand.
Well, I think the reason is that the technology is really hard. And I think if you look at the so-called blockchain trilemma, which is pick two out of decentralization, scalability, or security, I think the reason that people have had to make those compromises is because the computer science behind how you solve that is very, very difficult. And it really, I think one of the things that we're proud of is we have some of the top both academics from cryptography, from theoretical computer science, from distributed systems, mathematics, et cetera, here. And I think they've really taken the challenge of how do you recreate a system from the ground up that has all of the right properties that allow anyone in the world to use it and allow it to scale in ways that have been very difficult. And so I think generally speaking, if you look at whether it's delegated proof of stake or bonded proof of stake or others, they've had to make compromises either to get to scalability, or they've had to make compromises around scalability in order for it to be public and permissionless. And I think what we really represent is the first platform that doesn't compromise on any of those vectors.
Well, can we talk about that though? That statement's quite significant. You're saying that you're not making any of those compromises to achieve scalability. You're trying to do that at the consensus layer. If that's the case, can you just explain a bit more about how you can make that statement where you're not making any of those compromises to scale?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the most fundamental things that is part of the design of Algorand is that if you look at most other networks, there are either miners or there are centralized block proposers that effectively run the network. In Algorand, it's the reverse. It's users that run the network. And every user for every round runs a lottery on their own computer. So every user that's online, where they self-select themselves, which sounds almost paradoxical. But the idea is that lottery is issued in a way that there's one block proposer and a committee of confirmers. That committee and the proposer change every single block, and it's always chosen at random out of the entire universe of users in the system. So the more users that Algorand has, the faster the network becomes, the more secure it becomes. And we think that's critically different, where really the only limiting factor in terms of transactional speed on the Algorand network is how quickly blocks can be propagated around it. And that's the fastest that you can be in a distributed system. So right. I think it's just sort of the elegance in the way the protocol was designed that sort of has allowed us to approach things in a different way than most of the other projects have.
Sure. Yeah, I've actually read, some have referred it to as the secret sauce of Algorand, this self-selection. Now, with regard to some of the more tech-focused aspects, and I'm sorry if we go deep into this, but just let me know if some of it's too deep. With regard to cryptographic sortitioning, that's one of the big features that Silvio's designed. It's got democracy built into its distribution model. Can you talk us through why sortitioning is so important to this method?
Well, I think, really, if you take what I just described before, which is this a lottery that each user runs, I mean, really, that's the use case of cryptographic sortition. So really, that's the tech behind it and behind how they're able to make this work. And I think if you, look at some of Silvio's inventions, whether it's zero knowledge proofs or verifiable random functions, a lot of the underlying techniques that he's either invented or been a part of in terms of cryptographic primitives, I think what they've really done is found a way to bring those into use in a novel way that really enables fairness and performance in the system.
Right.
And so I think, there's sort of a number of different kind of fundamental elements. Cryptographic sortition is certainly one that are really the true enablers behind the protocol.
Right. Well, obviously there's some others, but I want to talk to you about them specifically because this is, I guess, the meat in your consensus model. One of them is the VRF, the verifiable random function. The randomness of this obviously is critical. Can you talk us through that just briefly to help understand perhaps, why embedding this is so imperative to have the success of your consensus?
Yeah, well, I think there are many different types of attacks. And I think, when you talk to folks that are cryptographers or distributed systems computer scientists, they speak a lot about adversaries. And so I think if you look at the use of VRF and randomness, one of the things about Algorand that only a few other projects have is the fact that, one, all of our underlying technology has been peer reviewed and presented at various computer science conferences. The other is that it's all mathematically proven in terms of the different attack vectors, understanding how much money needs to be online, how much honest money, and so I think really one of the things that sets us apart is the rigor behind the way we've done that. And so while I think the exact uses of the technology is important, I also think the depth at which it's understood and the fact that it's proven out scientifically to be secure is very important as well. And I think for anybody who wants to look into the deeper technical details, I'd encourage them to go read the Algorand white paper, the original one, and the follow-ups, where really describe some of the details of the protocol as it's being released tomorrow.
Absolutely. Now, on that note, I want to talk to you about Silvio himself. Now, obviously, you know him very well. He's a Turing Award winner. He's an MIT a scholar. He's world class. He's all class. How important has it been to have someone like this? And I ask you because there are some criticisms out there also with regard to this question, saying perhaps Algorand's really riding on the backs of his name, of his success.
Well, I think first of all, Silvio is a brilliant scientist and problem solver, and I think a couple of things is for sure, I think his notoriety has drawn attention to the project. We see that as a good thing, not as a bad thing. I think the science behind the project stands on its own, and we'd welcome anybody to comment or critique what's there. But I think largely the work that's been done and sort of the original theory behind Algorand has been in the market for several years. And I think we have yet to really see anybody debunk, the fundamental basis behind it.
Well, on that note though, Steve, has there been any efforts? I've read some articles that actually have attempted this. Are you aware of any that have done any peer assessments where it has been quite critical, or they presented some key arguments that are reasonable and fair and academic?
Yeah, sure. Well, we've definitely seen people. There's definitely been other research papers that have come up that analyze different parts of the protocol. I think in each of the cases, there's been where people have been critical. Often they didn't completely understand some elements of it. I think also we've definitely seen some that didn't really have basis in fact. Mm-hmm. There have at the same time been several that have had reasonable criticisms. I think some of those are being addressed in what will be the production version of Algorand. Some of the criticisms are being addressed in roadmap elements that we've put out there. So definitely we listen carefully to feedback from the market. And, I think it's, we consider it flattery that other academic institutions and research projects are cropping up to look at some of the finer points of the protocol here.
Absolutely. And I think it's really, it really shows a maturity in your team to acknowledge that there's some things that you could perhaps, advance your own protocol or advance your own research and theory, and then move forward towards your own actual.
And on that point, I would just encourage anybody, both from your community and elsewhere, to take a look at the roadmap that we've published. I think there's a number of elements there that are standards efforts that we're working with other projects on, and many of them are, really tailored towards improving both functionality and performance. And I think many of the innovations in the half dozen or so roadmap elements that we published are as or more innovative than even the core protocol itself. Right. And so our view is we want people to, be inspired by the technology, but we also know that, the launch of the protocol is day one, and that's the starting point. And we want people to stay committed because of the, continual innovation that we're driving in the market.
Absolutely. And that's coming up, and we'll talk about that really soon. It's exciting to hear this launch of a Dutch auction. But before we do, I want to talk to you about some of the governance model itself. Now, you have open standards designed to really lead this out. Can you talk us through that? How important is the governance system to ensure its security, its finality, and its decentralization?
Sure. Well, I think it's very important, and we think that sort of governance needs to be in the hands of the token holders themselves. And I think if you look at the form, or if you look at the process for achieving consensus on a block, in reality, that's the same process that will be used for consensus on changes to the network and whatnot. And so, again, it's simple from a kind of philosophical standpoint, but I think in reality, we think that puts power into the hands of people who are participants in the system, and we think that that's an important thing long term.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the current launch, or you're about to do this. The date is Wednesday, June 19th, 6 o'clock is SGT time. So can you just give us a rundown firstly on what we're talking about here? I'll let you lead this because you certainly know a lot about it.
Sure. So the Algorand Foundation is going to be launching, the Algorand Foundation is based in Singapore. They will be launching the public Algorand network and also be issuing the algo as a token publicly on the 19th. I mentioned earlier that, thoughtful economic management is something that the project believes in, and I think what the folks at the foundation have put together is seems to be well received by the market and is very interesting. And so there is a Dutch auction that will run starting 6 p.m. Singapore time on the 19th, and which I believe is tomorrow.
Yes, and for those who are listening tomorrow when I edit this, it is going to be today at that point. So
I got it right. So sorry. So anyway, coming up soon. And, the idea there is that, no algos have been pre-sold prior to the auction. There's never been a price set in the market. We want the market to determine the value of the algo and go from there.
So essentially you're floating this through the auction. You're letting the people decide and find price discovery. But let's talk about the most important part, and that is why you did this. What was the reasoning behind it? And perhaps for those who don't know exactly what a Dutch auction even means, Steve, can we start there? The what then through to the why.
Sure. So a Dutch auction is a decreasing price auction where it starts at a maximum price, and then the mechanism finds the lowest price at which the auction clears, and then at that point, everyone receives the lowest price. So the auction starts higher and then ticks down. And this is the way typically central banks issue bonds and other things.
Is there anything that could go wrong if you're trying to find the bottom price, Steve, in this process? Like, is there anything that could drop this price right down because, simply by the sheer nature of this?
Well, I think, we'll have to see what the market thinks. But, generally for people who bid above the eventual closing price, their bid then automatically becomes included, as does the dollar amount that they bid, and then they'll be included in whatever the final clearing is. So I think, again, we're not really speculating on what might happen at the auction, but, we're glad to see that people are interested in it and hope it goes well.
Absolutely. Now, the big question is why? Obviously, you've seen ICO, you've seen IEO, you've seen IDO, you've seen pretty much every acronym out there. So why do something so different?
Yeah, I think if you look at, if you look even from the core technology in the early papers, really democratizing finance and democratizing a distributed platform is something that, Silvio and all of us here believe really strongly in. I think if you look at, many of the distribution techniques that have been used up until now, they tend to be unfair to sort of one party or another. And, all the things we've looked at, have sort of meant that they tend to also give priority to sort of early participants and others. The reason behind an auction, and the Dutch auction in particular, is we wanted to ensure that one, everyone receives the same price, and two, that everyone has a fair chance who's interested in participating in the economy, in the token economy of Algorand. And so it's very important to us, and also we wanted to do it in a way that doesn't favor any particular type of user or one class of user or bigger participants.
Oh, I see. So you're removing the hierarchy of access, the hierarchy of privilege, taking away even the elements of blue collar to white collar and so forth, and letting people just have, access in this open slather approach. And I appreciate that, sincerely. But prior to this, I also wanted to clarify, you did have some raises, didn't you? You did, in order to raise capital before, prior to this auction, there were people who could get in. Is that correct? You had accredited investors in a raise.
We did an equity raise, and so Algorand Inc., which is a U.S. business, not the Algorand Foundation that's launching the token, sold equity, and that was summer of last year.
Okay, so what's your sentiment there? Obviously, you're a proponent of fairness, but you had to be an accredited investor for equity. So what's the difference, compared to those who were early entrants, let's say, for example, in seed rounds and private sales of these previous models we see in crypto? What's the difference there? Because people were able to access to the equity. Certainly there were preclusions involved. Not everybody could go and get them. You had to have certain, there were certain requisites from Algorand.
Well, I think there are certain realities in the market. I mean, the technology had to be developed to a point where it could be taken and put it into a public network. We felt strongly that there's going to be financial opportunities to sort of grow a business, around the Algorand technology, and that's what we're doing here. We're glad investors agreed. And we're also excited that it's going to be launched as a public network.
Got it.
One of the things that, and so we definitely think about different opportunities in different ways, and are excited both to continue developing software and seeing what the world does with it. Are also excited to see that technology to work as a public network.
Right. I also want to talk to you, Steve. Obviously, we'll keep talking about the auction, but with regard to those investors, now we're not just talking about run-of-the-mill investors either. And I think it's important that we discuss this, because when you open this opportunity up for equity investment, you didn't open that up even really to your typical lay accredited investor. Can you tell us a little bit more about the nature and the scale of the kind of investors that you actually onboarded in the equity round?
Sure. Well, I guess first of all, I guess there's another point, which is, the reason we wanted, every employee at Algorand has equity in the company. We wanted our investors to have equity in the company and to be incented in the same way that everyone here is, to build kind of a great business over the long term. And I think that long-term focus is something that's important. We've tried to share in the market. And so we really looked at folks sort of around the world, places like Union Square Ventures and Pillar, who were early backers, but funds sort of all across the world, and people further from institutional settings, also from, we had several mining companies and other folks participating. So we were really, I think, pleased with not only the sort of types of investors, but also that they represented such a diverse geographic and style of business. And that's something we really wanted. We wanted to, sort of build, really build kind of support for the project, across the market.
Absolutely. And you certainly, what's interesting also is the global reach that you have. You alluded to that, but you certainly had key representation from different regions of the world as well.
That's right. And, our partners have been incredibly helpful in getting the word out about the technology. Silvio himself has spoken to probably over 10,000 people over the past several months. We have meetups going on, all over the world, all the time. We have folks in Dubai today and in Tel Aviv next week. And so, continually we're trying to get out in the market and in front of people, building our developer community, and making sure that people are aware of the project.
Absolutely. And Steve, it's clear that Silvio has a strong stage presence. He's he's very much loved wherever he goes with regard to his academic following. People both in crypto and in academic spheres outside of that really respect a lot of the work he's done. So he is certainly bringing a strong voice to your agenda and your project itself. But going back to the auction.
We'll go back to the auction in a second. I think, one thing I would encourage anyone here who's new to the project, I think one of Silvio's greatest gifts is being able to take very complicated technology and be able to explain it in terms that almost anybody can understand. And so for anyone who wants to know more, I would suggest they go to either our website, algorand.com, or algorand.foundation, and listen to some of the videos that he's posted, because it's a very easy way to get a quick understanding of.
Yes, and I'll make sure I put the links below as well, Steve, so that people can do that. Now, with regard to some of the exclusions of your auction, let's go there for a moment. Now, not every country and every person can participate in this auction, is that right?
That's right, and expressly people in the US and also people in China are excluded from participation there. There are several other jurisdictions as well. For anyone who wants to get more details, we suggest they go to the auction section on the Algorand Foundation website.
Right. Okay. Now, with regard to tips, now this is going to be interesting because obviously there's certain things you put up in your post with regard to ease of use. One of them says that, you can, how to create a fund, how to set up secondary wallets. Can you just talk us through just your advice, about what the process is? Because people are going to be, doing this, those who want to, are going to go through these steps.
Sure. So for anyone who is in a approved jurisdiction and, they need to pass know your customer and anti-money laundering checks. That's done through a third party. When they've cleared that, then they do have to go through a process to create a wallet. If they don't have one will be created for them online as part of the process. But however, we'd suggest for anyone that they set up a second wallet that they create offline and make sure it's been done securely. Security is definitely very important, and so we would recommend that anybody who's participating do that. Also make sure that everyone just gives some time prior to the auction to ensure that they have enough time for any form of payment that they're putting in to clear. Again, all that's spelled out on the foundation's website, and so we suggest that people just go through the details there carefully. But
yes, I had a look. It's quite clear. It's very sequential. It's very transparent. It's very well structured. I wanted to talk to you though with regard to some of the reasoning behind it. Once again, with regard to refund policies, some of the value adds of doing the auction itself.
Yeah, well, the refund policy is definitely, I think, unique. We haven't seen really other projects doing that. I think if you look at the foundation's goals for that, it's stated online there, but to reiterate, sort of two things. One, we want people to feel comfortable that they can come and participate in the token economy. At the same time, I think it's important that people know that they can come get value back after. And the other is, I think what sort of troubles us in a way is that we see a lot of blockchains where people don't use the tokens for very much.
Right.
So definitely encouraging use cases, but also encouraging people to be comfortable using the tokens, for those use cases and not worrying about, whether they're sort of losing out or what the economics are. We want to try to dissuade people from that sort of thought process, and we think that the refund policy is a step in the right direction for that, and giving people some confidence that they can use the tokens, but know they have an economic basis to get back to a year later.
Yes, and the way I often looked at it was almost an insurance policy that you could have this trust that was built into the whole model of the Dutch auction, and a lot of people really appreciate that. Now, what about some of the risks with regard to perhaps say you lose your wallet or any other the risks of the process of the Dutch auction? Have you really thought about that so that people can have a means to go to some sort of, there's some sort of recompense, or there's a process they can get to a person and explain, I've lost my wallet, what do I do?
Yeah, well, again, I think custody of people's wallets and tokens is a very important part of crypto, and folks need to, need to take that seriously. I think one of the things that Algorand does support are, multi-signature wallets, we would suggest people use, so that way they have multiple sets of keys. However, I'll just stress again that careful custody of people's keys is their responsibility, and important, and that's going to be important because anybody who wants to redeem their algos is going to need to be able to bring the right number of algos back during the redemption window.
Absolutely. Now, Steve, I want to ask you, obviously the IEO has been a really popular term this year, and it was quite novel initially, and now there's signs that some of that's waning and wearing off a little bit, and there'll be other iterations, I'd imagine. But because it was essentially a public offering, how is this different, in that context of just a public offering? Because if you think about it, the IEO or any of them, it was still an open offer. It was still a means from which a certain small number of people in that public domain could access this. Some would argue it was a fair way to do it, even though it was very clearly a very expedited process, and often in seconds. That was a big issue. But in terms of functionality, it was just open slather. It allowed people to access that. So what's the real difference with this, if you think about it in the public's respect, given that you're still having price discovery, you're still letting everyone access this? What about the processes? What about the time aspect? I mean, how long is this all going to take? Is it going to be a mad rush, or is it going to be sequential and so that people don't have to rush?
Well, I mean, first, I can't speak for how IEOs came to be. I think the focal point for Algorand is fairness, and fairness in price discovery. We don't know. IEOs are still setting the price. Out in the market.
That's true.
Who sets them? I don't know. I presume it's either the exchanges or the project. But again, Algorand has sought to not be setting the price and to let the market determine what it sees as fair value for it.
I see.
Which is why we focused in on the auction. So
that's a really good point. Is there no algorithm or anything at all that is included in this model that has any means of, as you said, there's allusions to the possibility of price setting previously. Is there no algorithm or anything at all built into this model whereby it does anything like that? Is it purely organic, this approach?
Well, if you look at the auction protocol that we've created is open source. All the bids are on the blockchain. Everything is transparent. Everyone can see who bid and for how much and who the winners are. So everything that we're doing is completely transparent, and the market determines it. But we're not involved in that process, and anybody can go back to the blockchain at any time and see exactly what those bids are, and can see that it was the market, and the market participants are the ones who determined what the closing price was.
Got it, and I appreciate all this transparency. Now, for those who'd like to know more, make sure that you do check out the website. Wednesday, June 19th, 6 p.m. Singapore time. That is the time. That will be today, probably, as this video goes out. Now, the token itself, Steve, it's always so important. You've talked about this at length. Certainly, Silvio has, to have a token economic structure, a token dynamic that is clearly utility-centered, clearly about real use. Now, you're going to be building a native token from the outset. How can we really prove that this is a utility token?
Sure. Well, we have a series of announcements, some of which we've started to. One that went out last week was with Otoy. I think you'll see more and more. And I think what we've focused on is ensuring that as people come build their applications and create new types of financial products and instruments or decentralized apps, that the algo is sort of the primary token on the platform. And I guess the short answer is, even some of our initial launch partners are focused on bringing real estate onto the blockchain and tokenizing assets. We see a variety of different types of applications that we're both working with partners on. And I guess the short answer there is, stay tuned. I think we have some pretty interesting announcements on that side.
Yeah, well, I always like to dig a bit deeper, Steve. So let's do that. Now, with regard to the pipeline, let's discuss that a little bit more, because you've mentioned in previous discussions, even on the Algorand YouTube, that you have real estate as one vertical that you're addressing. You have others as well. Can you give us some more clarity on that? What's the magnitude of your pipeline? How many verticals are you looking at? You must have a lot more than you're telling us with regard to prep that you've done to onboard some of these applications and these services and businesses that want to use Algorand.
For sure. And we expect, I'll give a couple of examples of recent announcements that we've had, and, we're going to have more announcements soon. Last week we announced Flipside Crypto. That's an analytics platform that is both free for all of our developers, but also where they have premium use cases that people can pay for. We think that's the interesting way for people to understand how their applications are performing. Also give us analytics into the utility of the platform overall. And we're going to be sharing dashboards with the community that sort of prove out the effectiveness and kind of the use of all the applications on the platform. I think when you look into what a number of the people we're working with are, we see many folks that are building either decentralized marketplaces or their own layer 2 technologies. Otoy, that we announced a couple of weeks ago, a relationship with, is a great example of that. They do special effects rendering and have created a decentralized way to use spare GPU capacity to pay people to help them with their rendering. We think it's a really interesting application where they have an existing scale business that they're going to be extending out to the community for support on.
Right. So you obviously got
also just one. Yeah, also just one other one. Give an example. Top Networks is a decentralized messaging and VPN service. They have about 60 million users on their platform. I think that's another interesting use case for our blockchain. So I think if you look, I mean, we've definitely are focused on bringing both large scale user communities, but also really interesting decentralized apps and business models. And we're going to have a steady flow of releases and information that people will see once we launch.
Yes, and what's interesting about Top as well is that they're literally connected to the technology we're using right now with Zoom. They have the advisor of Zoom on board, so they're very much about communication networks. They want to try and make sure that there's real use case there. And it's interesting how you're focused a lot on these real world partners, these real world companies. Can you give us some names of perhaps, for the audience listening in, that we can understand the kinds of reach that you have in that mainstream sector? Are you reaching out to some of the businesses that perhaps weren't switched onto blockchain, that you're literally enabling that to make that switch?
Sure. Well, I think that really goes back to and goes back to sort of the community efforts that we're making. Being out in different communities around the world. I think separately, if you look at from a developer relations standpoint, some of the folks we have helped build the developer communities around JavaScript and WebAssembly and others. And so really taking an approach of how do we attract a lot of developers quickly, both from companies big and small. And I think our perspective is, we don't necessarily know what all the killer apps are going to be in the blockchain and crypto space, but we want to make sure that as many as possible are built on top of Algorand.
Right. So if you're going to have, let's say hypothetically, you're going to have a substantial number of applications onboarding onto your platform. What does that mean for your token? Let's talk about that in a real sense. We've seen this with the likes of Ethereum, for example. It's been approved as a commodity-like utility at the very least. What does that mean for Algorand? Does it have a complex sort of definition, because it's not only having its own robust utility for itself, but it's also representing a much more vast ecosystem?
I think our goal is to have many different ecosystem participants that are participating for all sorts of different reasons and building technology and launching their own products. Our view is that over time, those applications being successful will drive organic demand for the algo and will drive transactional activity on the network, and all of those things are positive for public permissionless chain like ourselves. And so again, we take a very long-term view that we're sort of in early days of the decentralization movement, and we're definitely committed, I think, to bringing forward, not only words but technology that really embodies the principles that I think were sort of first surfaced by Bitcoin and some of the other projects, and really trying to see if we can move things forward.
Sure. Now, Steve, one of the challenges we see, though, in almost every single blockchain startup since the beginning is the conundrum of crypto economics or of token economic modeling. Now, when people start to interact and use this, clearly you're building out a utility. There's no question of that. You're going to have a significant number of applications even this year as you start to unfurl and demonstrate your capacity. One of the problems we often see, even from an engineering and mathematical standpoint, is this correlation between the token itself and the ecosystem you're building. We see evidence from the first wave of projects from 2017, a lot of devalued token, and yet the ecosystem grows. So how do you address this literal problem we're still seeing? We're still seeing no evidence, strong evidence of a correlation of token utility value and the ecosystem that it represents.
Sure, I think it's a good question. I think the simplest answer I can give you is to use sort of the internet as a history lesson, which is, if you take 2001, Amazon peak to trough, I think was $300 to $3. If you look at the growth in the users, they continued sort of up and to the right over subsequent years. And I think if you took a long-term perspective, that Amazon has done just fine over the years.
That's a
And
good
so
analogy. I like the
I think
simple
there's
response there.
Yeah, I think there's just a need to divorce people's worry about, token price and market cap from the actual kind of user growth. And, everything we see in the market suggests that, the caliber of projects that are focusing on their work right now is quite high, and I think has shifted a lot over the past year or two. And that, it takes high quality projects to propel the market forward. And so, we're just going to keep doing our work and building our community. And we think that, over the long run, the rest of this stuff will sort itself out.
Right. And you make a good point with your allusion to Amazon, because price didn't always determine value, or it didn't determine the inherent efforts of the team at any given point. It was really just, at some point, sometimes even speculative especially given that the flux in that first iteration of the internet. And then we're seeing that now. We're seeing a really strong push for speculation. Obviously, exchanges are involved. But I think what you're really making clear is that things will graduate to a much more stable, much more understandable ecosystem where technology drives innovation and really is reflected in the token itself longitudinally.
Yeah, for sure. That's what we think. That's what we think will play out over the long run. And we're excited to be a part of however that shakes out.
Sure. Now, with your valuation, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but 64 million you raised. How do you work those kinds of things out? I mean, you copped a lot of criticism, so did many actually, and there were some that raised billions actually. So how do you determine how much you need when you start to raise these funds to build something like Algorand?
Sure. Well, again, I'd like to just separate that, we sold equity in our business here, which is a technology business. The tokens will be launched via their Algorand Foundation and be part of the public network. But that said, we looked again at making sure that we had budget for several years where we could focus on building the technology, getting it out in the market, and seeing what the market thought about it, and adjusting accordingly without having to be distracted by anything that might be going on in the market. And I can't speak for what others were doing, but that was our thought process. And we've been doing our work over here. So again, I think we thought we would get it into the market in the time frame that we have, and we're excited to share that. And I think on the tech side, for anyone who's interested, we did open source all of our code last week, so everyone could come and take a look at what we've done. I think there's some, for sure, groundbreaking computer science that's in there. And so
I would imagine that your GitHub is quite full then if you've released a lot of your code. And obviously the plan is to release more of that code to build out the repository from now and into the future. And obviously
both ourselves, and also we have partners contributing to that as well. So we're excited to also build a community of contributors and not just ourselves.
Sure. Now, what are you doing in that sense? Obviously, by open sourcing, you want developers to access this. What's the strategy, particularly to get more developers engaged with Algorand?
Sure, we want folks to be engaged. Also, I think security is critically important in kind of the blockchain and crypto space. We want third parties from the outside to be able to take a look and give us feedback on that front as well. And more and more, we'd like other people to contribute parts of the project that they think are important. And at the same time, we have a continued emphasis at Algorand on long-range research and continuing to advance the science. And some of that is both for Algorand, some of it is with other projects, and we think are more standards efforts that will not only benefit us, but benefit other projects and the space as a whole. So I think there's a lot of interesting work going on, and really where we are now is literally the first step.
Right. What about integrating with universities? MIT, perfect example. What are you doing to not only advance the cause and the plans for Algorand, but really allow for new technologists, so innovative thinkers to really utilize the technology, utilize the code, translate that into perhaps an application? How do you access all these universities, all of these new wave of thinkers?
Sure. Well, first of all, we're really excited. I think seeing support for the project by so many great institutions around the world, I think is really flattering. And I think it really goes sort of both ways. I think one, I think the involvement is both a recognition of the academic heritage of the business here. We have many great academic minds that are working at the project. In addition, I think on the flip side, it's obviously, I think if you look at other sort of great businesses that have built over time, they seeded their technology into academia, got feedback, got people excited about it. Like I said earlier, we think getting, especially, students coming out of school excited about blockchain and crypto, getting them building it, familiarizing them with technology like Algorand, and even helping, have some of our professors, speak to those students and at the universities and help build curriculum around it. We think is all critically important to kind of helping seed the next wave of people who are going to be out in the market building new companies and applications soon. And so we think that that's definitely a good way not only to help us but to help the crypto community as a whole by bringing new smart people into the space.
Of course, and certainly Silvio is leading the way, being someone that the person that he is. Now, with regard to some of the criticisms, I just wanted to explore this a bit more because often in interviews you're not going to have this discussion. I would imagine many of them are just going to be promoting and discussing all the boons and the benefits. But some of the real concerns came up from the academic sort of sphere. One of them was known as the lazy validator problem. So I want to just go into this for just a moment with regard to honest nodes, the honest actors, and the problem of making sure that 2/3 of the whole system is protected, to remove the risks of adversarial nodes and risks of attack, as you've alluded to. Now, some have suggested that there is this problem of lazy validators. What do you say to those kind of criticisms where the node structure is at risk?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. One, we'd recommend that anybody go take a look at some of our blog posts. We've addressed that and other concerns. In fact, we just put out an FAQ covering this set of topics that was written by Jing Chen, who's our chief scientist. So I'd encourage anyone to go look sort of factually at that. I think secondly, if you just take a step back, we see sort of responsible decentralization as something that's a core principle and is something that we've also published out. And for anyone interested, we would suggest that they go take a look at some of the details on the Algorand Foundation's website. And the reason is early days, definitely networks are more susceptible to attack, which is why the Algorand Foundation especially will have tokens online and will represent a greater percentage of the network while decentralization occurs. And as more users come to the system, as there's more people running infrastructure and more tokens are in circulation, that all kind of self resolves over time.
Right.
As much as there are criticisms on that one, I think also part of this is having a thoughtful process around launch and making sure that there are the people who have interest in the network are supporting it early on. And I think we've done a good job of bringing, I think, a unique group of people together to agree to do that. But because the network is public and permissionless, one of the primary goals is encouraging people from all sorts of places to come and participate, help be part of the network.
Sure. Now, in that respect, it harps back to staking in one sense, because they are the ones that really represent the true believers in this long term. They're willing to literally stake. Now, you've provided for a mechanism to do this online and offline. There are reward systems literally built in. Can you talk us through that for a moment with regard to those who are considering not just being part of the utility system, but the staking system itself?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. One, for the early and kind of early growth of the network, decision was made to reward any users that come and show that they're prepared to participate in some way. For people that are online, they can mark their tokens as online, register, be running a node, and help support the network. We hope lots of people do that. At the same time, we also understand that Algorand represents new technology. It works differently than perhaps other networks people are more used to. So we want to give people time to get up to speed and understand that. And so we've also created a simple way for folks to delegate their participation to the network, but they still have to correctly designate their tokens as offline and delegate that responsibility. And when they've done that, they'll be eligible for rewards after having registered.
And I think from memory, you advised that it's better to use desktops for a lot of the approach of the when you're doing the Dutch auction, for example. Now, with regard to staking, for in the same sense, what's your advice there with regard to those who are considering perhaps more online or offline? Is there any difference for staking rewards?
No, the rewards are the same. Well, effectively the same. Early days, there'll be more information, and we think over time that will shift. But early on, we want to encourage people to come participate in the network and learn about it, and then in the future we'll we suspect the reward system may be adjusted, but not in the early days. So today, people need to come and learn. They need to understand how to use our clients, how to designate their tokens as online or offline. And we want them to understand the technology and be part of the economy.
Sure. And is there a public document, or is there any means in which people can understand the actual staking model itself? So it's clear, it's in a table, and they can just go and explore exactly what's involved.
Sure. So on the Algorand Foundation's token dynamics page, the specifics of the token rewards, how that system works, are delineated there. In our developer tools, there's information about running nodes, about getting up online on the network. So we'd encourage people to come and check those things out and decide for themselves how they want to participate.
Got it. Now, just harping back again to those criticisms or risks, I wanted to ask you about forkability. Now, one of the things that I've read is that Algorand prides itself on not being forkable by design, but is that actually the case? Some have suggested that there is a potential for forking in the consensus.
Well, Algorand does not fork, and attempts to fork it or attempts to take it over. The protocol has resilience built in. It's resistant not only to attack on the protocol, but to an attack on the underlying network itself. And again, that goes back to the reason that that's possible, goes back to the way the core consensus protocol works, and the use of cryptographic sortition, in that there's only one block proposer selected per round, and there's only one group of validators. I think one of the principles of forking or partitioning of a network, if you look at, say, proof of work, is that it's follow the longest chain. And that's because the networks can become, there's more than one way that a transaction can be attached. In Algorand, there's only one committee and only one proposer. If the proposer is obscured, then that block will simply fail, and the network will proceed to the next block. If an honest majority can't be assembled, then the block won't be confirmed, and again, it'll move on. And so, again, while there's very complex technology behind it, I think the simplest answer is that the use of cryptographic sortition, the selection at random of committee members and block proposers every block, ensures that the network can't partition. It also ensures that even in the event of a malicious block proposer, a new block proposal will be selected randomly for the next block. And so you at most would have the network slowing down. You wouldn't have a situation forked or partitioned. And in the rare event that it could be, or there was the committees were sort of partitioned, the network has resilience built into that and can recover. So
yeah, and Steve, I really appreciate this, mate, because obviously I'm harping a bit on these topics, but it is important that we can really reaffirm that you literally have this structure built in place for security. You've resolved the trilemma, you can scale the consensus, and you can do it in a means which, you protect the integrity of your consensus without these risks. Because obviously there are those who've suggested these things, and the veracity necessarily isn't there, or it may be, but the point is you peer reviewed this, and you'll continue to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just add one more thing, is that we think that scalability, fast transaction confirmation time, finality of payments, all those things become critical, and security of the state of the blockchain, all are critically important when you have large scale assets and transactional volume going on.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a moment now with regard to the stress test, the throughput, the latency, the finality. Now, we've heard some ridiculous claims in the past, no doubt you have, with regard to some of these layer ones, suggesting they have millions of transactions per second moving. Now, you mentioned it's important. I totally agree. But what's the capacity requisites right now for what you need to do? And are you developing these throughputs, and are you reducing latency? Are you making sure that the performance is there continually to cope with the requirements that your ecosystem, your platform needs to do, and beyond that?
Sure. Well, our early goal was to have transactional throughput that would allow us to absorb a network of, say, Visa scale, and perform similarly. We're at that today at launch. We'll be over 1,000 transactions a second in a fully decentralized, distributed way, which nobody else is doing. Transaction confirmation time is less than 5 seconds on the running network. So we feel good about performance and feel that it's definitely comparable to many of the more established payment networks, and certainly an order of magnitude better than most of the existing blockchains today. Now, I think if you look at our roadmap, many of the layer one roadmap items are focused like Vault or Pixel on increasing transactional throughput, improving performance, and also ensuring that performance is the same forever and doesn't slow down as the blockchain grows over time. And so, we definitely encourage people to look at those elements, but those are going to be layering in soon. And so we see, a couple of we see at least an order of magnitude improvement possible, and from a transactional throughput standpoint. So I think definitely excited about the new tech we're going to roll out. We feel that for sure, given the sort of number of transactions in the public blockchain sphere in totality, we have plenty of performance to handle that day one. But also we're committed to making sure that as the network grows, that new tech is rolled out to ensure that capacity grows faster than.
Well, it sounds like, Steve, that you just got a lot going on this year. You guys have spent a lot of time building the infrastructure. You are now about to move into the space of the business being presented to the world. Clearly, the open source is one aspect. Another is the Dutch auction, and beyond that, really is one big thing we need to talk about, and that is how people will access these algo on exchanges. I know you're not going to like this question, but what is the plan there? How do you even work through the decision making of what makes a good exchange? There's literature out there to suggest that wash trading is a pandemic. It's a big problem in certain regions of the crypto world. How do you decide? How do you work out what you're going to do, and when are you going to do it?
Sure. Well, I guess the short answer there is not to dodge your question, but the Algorand Foundation is going to be announcing at some point soon who both initial and I think potentially future exchange partners are. I just suggest that everyone stay tuned for their announcements. But I think you bring up a good point that there's different quality of exchanges, and I'm sure everyone will be interested to hear where they ended up.
And Steve, on that note, have you all done your analysis of these suggestions that there are different grades, quality grades of exchange? Are you looking at those that are regulated? Are you looking at those that have been accredited in some way?
I think it's definitely true that there's different exchanges that have different size user bases. I think it's different. They all have different sort of business models. We definitely think that there are some that are higher quality than others. But I don't think it's really. I don't know enough about the exchanges businesses to really comment.
Sure.
I think I've seen the same sort of public information as you. So I
appreciate that. Now, what about?
I don't have enough information to really make any decisive comment there.
Sure. Now, what about top tier? We could argue that you're top tier with regard to your technology, the attention you brought to the space. Are you trying to reflect that? Is your plan to reflect the kind of quality you are with the reputation, standard, volume, every brand of the exchanges? Are you only going to work with those of the highest standard?
I think that you're sort of, I guess I'll just make one point on this, which is I think there's some expectation that the projects have control over what exchanges choose to list them. It's not really the case. I think it's a decentralized world, and that means it's decentralized in all sort of manner, and largely, I think if exchanges find projects interesting, they'll put those tokens on the exchange.
So you have no control at all. You're not engaged in the decision making, not engaged in any of the processing with those exchanges. And I ask you this because this is quite new to many people. Even though that is the process, it is the regulation, is the requirement. We don't necessarily see that happening. We don't assume that because there are question marks up to now about the processes involved in some of the ways in which some of these projects are listing. So are you saying that it really is the proper process for the exchanges to decide themselves?
I'm not advocating for a process one way or another. I'm just sort of pointing out factually that sort of the assumption that the projects decide where their tokens end up is not always the case.
Right.
So I wouldn't, I think what your inference was, or what you were suggesting is like, you know, is the project focused on having high quality partners? I'd say yes, absolutely. That's been from day one. I think if you look, whether it's investors or technology companies that we partnered with or others, you know, everything that we have control over, we try to make sure that we're dealing with people that match up well to sort of the thoughtfulness, I think, in professional project. I think that there's lots of people that we haven't talked to and lots of people that we're excited to find out what they're doing. But also, you know, in a decentralized space, you know, in a public permissionless network, anyone is welcome to join. And so I think that you know, that's just sort of the way it is. And, you know, we welcome that. I think, you know, it brings a lot of good side effects to welcome anybody to the community. But, you know, I think also I would just, you know, ask that, you know, people not pass judgment on, you know, things that are outside.
Yes, and I really appreciate that, Steve, because you can't control everything, especially in this very nascent space that we know is the crypto space. Now, with regard to your roadmap, just to finish off the interview, because it's been quite long and I really appreciate your time because it's late for me, but certainly you're very busy today. What are some of the things that, with regard to your roadmap this year up until the end, that you think are the most important milestones that you need to really let people know about in your plan? Obviously, the Dutch auction is just the start. And you're the CEO, you literally know what some of those plans are. What excites you most for this year?
Sure. Well, again, I'm just going to reiterate that, you know, largely what gets adopted in the public network is going to be up to the community, not, you know, we're not necessarily the ones deciding. In terms of priorities from a research and kind of engineering standpoint and code that we're writing, definitely if you look at things like Vault and Pixel, which also atomic swaps, you know, those are elements that we really feel enhance kind of layer one and enhance people's ability to build applications on top of the blockchain and have them perform well and you know, and enhance the functionality, not only functionality, but also enhance performance kind of in perpetuity. So I think we're definitely excited to just continue to evolve what's there. At the same time, I think what we're really excited for is to get the platform launched and hear what the market has to say. We think there's a very iterative process to building software, and that the launch of the protocol is not kind of the end of the road, it's the beginning. And you know, we're excited for more people to engage, to develop, share what they need to make their application successful. And so I think, you know, you'll also likely see our roadmap shift a little bit over time as we listen to that feedback and respond to the market.
Absolutely.
So we're excited to see what people have to say, and really appreciate all your time today.
Yeah, likewise, Steve. Thank you very much. So if you'd like to know more about Algorand, or if you'd like to know a little bit more about public permissionless systems, certainly look into all of the links that will all be provided below. Steve, thank you very much again for your time. I know you're busy. Today is your Dutch auction, will be when we release this. And obviously it's an exciting time because we're looking at price discovery. We're looking at how this system can evolve and really provide decentralization in a way that we really just haven't seen at the end of the scale of this. We're literally looking at scaling consensus. And I think that's really important we understand that. How you do that, led by a Turing Award winner, Silvio, is second to none. And it's going to be exciting to see the kind of scale that you bring to the real world with regard to the applications that onboard, and naturally and in this organic process of discovering the code. It's open source. If you'd like to know more, make sure you check it out. But thank you very much once again, Steve, for leading out Algorand, for being the CEO, presenting this to the world in a business sense. And I wish you all the very best for the rest of this year and beyond that as well, mate.
Thanks, Brad. It was great talking to you. Really appreciate your support. Take care.
You're welcome, mate.